Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. It's Monday, April 24th, and I'm your host, Cara Santa Maria. This week, I sit down with Dr. Steven Strogatz, professor of applied mathematics at Cornell University and author of several popular books about math. But before we dive into that, I want to thank those of you who made Talk Nerdy possible this week. And of course, I'm going to start with those of you who have visited patreon.com/talknerdy and pledged your support. In order of support, let's go with Phil T-Bear, Timothy Glover, Jonathan Wright, Pedro M. Rosario Barbosa, Christian Jeffrey, David Lacer, Jeffrey Perez, Stuart Ogue, The Honorable Husband, Charles Payet, Jafe, Gabriel Felipe Jaramillo Gonzalez, Brian Holden, and Jeffrey Sewell. And of course, there are many, many more of you. If you want to support the show, that is one way to do it. You can also visit my website at carasantamaria.com and look at all the other ways to do it. Guys, this weekend was so cool. How many of you went out for the March for Science? I got to co-host in D.C. the rally right before the march, and it was so much fun. I was up there with my friends Derek Muller, who is also known as Veritasium on YouTube, and Questlove Gomez from The Roots. And there were so many great guests, including the one and only Bill Nye the Science Guy. And it was such an incredible event. It was pouring down rain, and people still came out by the tens of thousands and supported this incredible cause. And then we all got to march together. I really hope that you guys were involved. It was an awful lot of fun. And if you want to see all of the festivities, because the show was incredible, they had John Batiste performing throughout the show and a whole bunch of really amazing, amazing speakers. If you want to see it, you can search for the stream. They streamed it live like throughout the world. So, and almost every major news organization picked it up. So the stream is available online. Just search for that and you'll be able to find it. All right, guys, without any further ado, let's go ahead and welcome him to the show. He is an applied mathematician who works in the areas of nonlinear dynamics and complex systems at Cornell University. He's actually the Jacob Gould Sherman Professor of Applied Mathematics there. And he's written 4 popular books about math: Nonlinear Dynamics and Chaos, Sync, The Calculus of Friendship, and of course, The Joy of X. Here he is, Steven Strogatz. Well, Steven, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. It's going to be fun.
Do you like to be called Steven or Steve? Because I find in emails I always call you Steve.
Yeah, that's a question of whether you're in my family or not. So my mother always called me Steven, but then if she wanted to get my attention, she would say Steve because it sounded so strange. But in public or professionally, I'm always Steve. But my family always calls me Steven. So take your pick.
Always, isn't that funny when the family is more formal?
I know, it's a little bit strange. You'd think it should be the other way around, but no.
I love it. And when you teach, do you still teach?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I love that.
That's my main job.
That's so great. So when you teach, do your students call you Dr. Strogatz or Professor, or do they call you Steve? That's
an interesting issue, too, because there can be cultural differences or, some people really want to insist on Professor Strogatz. It also depends on the age of the student a little bit. So I find that my undergraduates, I tend to encourage them to call me Professor or Professor Strogatz, but my grad students, I would say, they're budding professionals. So I would say, call me Steve. And some of them do, but some are uncomfortable. And some, of course, don't want to say anything. They'll just talk without.
Yeah, I think that's how it was when I was in grad school. I think that, as an undergrad, you call all of the professors Dr. So-and-so or Professor so. I don't know why in the South, I grew up in Texas, we didn't really call anybody professor. I found that was really common when I moved to New York. But when I was in Texas, everybody was doctor this, doctor that. And then professor came up in the Northeast. Very strange.
It is true. There is something going on there. I haven't quite figured out what it means because I'm not very comfortable with doctor, but of course it's technically okay. And the one that really gets me, and it really shouldn't, is Mr.
Oh, yeah.
Because kids, right out of high school will be used to calling their teachers Miss or Mr.
Oh, you're right.
Professors don't like that. At least I don't. I feel like, no, you're in college now, dude.
Yeah, there is always that when you have those first year undergrads, there's like a breaking you have to do, kind of like a horse, where they really learn what it means to be in college. Like, yeah, you can't call your parents. I'm legally not even allowed to talk to your parents.
That's true. Yep, that comes up.
Oh, it's so interesting. All right. Well, it's funny. Okay. We've been talking about that, but we've got to talk about first why you're here and who you are. Although I did already introduce you on the show. We do a little time traveling when we podcast because I record the intro separately and then glue it to the front of the episode. But Steve, you are an incredible professor of mathematics, which is really funny because depending on the type of time traveling that I do and when this episode airs, I had Marcus du Sautoy very recently also, who is a professor of what they would call maths at Oxford. And
Yes.
so having two math professors, either back-to-back or with one break in between, is really kind of uncommon for the podcast, only because when it comes to the public communication of STEM fields, I think in many ways math trails, and it's exciting when there's somebody who's so good at speaking about math in plain language, and you are him. You are absolutely him.
Thanks. It's. I think you're right that for some reason the other parts of STEM have been doing a better job of this, and there are just kind of a handful of mathematicians who are in the business of public communication, or at least who feel comfortable doing it. And I don't. Yeah. So Marcus du Sautoy is definitely one of them. I don't really know what to say about that. There's one other field which is pretty close to math that I think may be in even worse shape than we are, honestly, which is computer science.
Oh, I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I'm guessing, have you had computer scientists on the show?
I don't think I've had any on the show.
See, there's
yet.
something going on with them.
Yeah. And it's not because I don't want to. It's because it's been hard to find them. I might talk to somebody who is like a coder or who cares about getting, young girls interested in coding or interested in computer science, but less so a professional academic computer scientist.
Yeah, I don't really know what's going on with that. And I've mentioned it to my colleagues in computer science a few times because on the one hand, their subject is so vibrant and so exciting and really hot. This is one of the most popular majors now, and for all kinds of obvious reasons. And yet, if you look at the, say, by the measure of pop science books, you will almost never find a book. I'm not saying there are none, there are some, but compared to all the string theorists writing about physics or, the people writing about the genome or neuroscience, you just don't see very much in the popular press or in popular books about computer science. And I think there's a big opportunity for them that they're missing. That is them, the professors. I don't know why they're not doing it.
Absolutely, because it's really in many ways the future of, I think the only kind of narrow band where you do see that kind of science communication, but oftentimes it's less science communication and more kind of sci-fi, is when we talk about artificial intelligence and we talk about kind of the future of computer science and neuroscience and their relationship to one another.
Right.
But you're right. When it comes to the technical aspects of computer science, I don't know if I don't think I've ever read, and my bookshelves spilleth over with books about STEM. And I'm not sure if I've ever read a book like similar to your book, The Joy of X, where they actually break down these complicated topics and give me sort of a guided tour through what computer science is. Yeah. I've never experienced something like that.
Let's just talk about this for a minute, because I think it's an interesting, vacuum would be putting it too strongly, but it's something that I think all across STEM is not happening as much as it should, and I think there's a real hunger for it. So, like you mentioned, the case of computer science connected to neuroscience. So people want to talk about implanting, like we will become hybrid creatures in the future with kind of computer prostheses to make our brains have better memory or better speed. And that's all fun to think about, or to wonder about, Terminator futures where it's us against the robots or us against the AIs. But how about talking about the real excitement of computer science as it actually exists today, or as has existed for the past, well, I don't know. It's a young field, maybe 50 years, 70 years, like Alan Turing or John von Neumann. Those
Yeah,
they're
it depends on
characters.
what you call a computer. Exactly.
Yeah, so that's the real kind of first electronic or mechanical computers sometime in the middle of the 20th century. But you could go back to Ada Lovelace or to Leibniz. There are people thinking about machines for doing logic or for doing calculations. There was something called Charles Babbage's analytical engine. These ideas have been around for a long time. There was a terrific article actually recently in The Atlantic called something like From Aristotle to AI. And
I love that.
It was about the history of logic going back to the a few hundred BC in Aristotle's hands, but how logic, which you might think is a sort of obscure part of philosophy, in fact, is the underpinning of modern computer science. And so this was an article that went exactly in the vein that I'm talking about, which is teaching people about the rich history and cultural aspects of these STEM disciplines. Why we don't have to talk about the future, we can, but let's talk about the present and the past too, because these subjects, engineering would be another one. How come there isn't more out there about the creativity and ingenuity that goes into building bridges or designing airplanes or the iPhone? There's just a lot to talk about. Or even in science, why don't we read more stuff in the newspaper about the brilliant people doing chemistry? It's like
chemistry's another one.
Yeah, is chemistry not sexy? Sure, it's sexy. You just got to pitch it right.
Yeah, I had a graduate student from Caltech on my show recently, named Dagny Fleischman, and she has done a lot of work around her campus to improve kind of student relations with the administration, with professors. But aside from that, one of the things that she mentioned was wanting to start a campaign of whether it's like stickers or literature or something where you can add it to all of these different technologies in your life to just remind people that there's so much science that goes into them, that it's not magic and that it's not a black box, maybe powered by quantum mechanics or powered by mathematics. And I actually made a little... I drive an electric car. I drive a Chevy Bolt, and I made a little... license plate holder, custom made it, and it says powered by physics, and I drive it around just because it's true. It's like, let's stop and think about the fact that there are real scientists and real engineers and real people who did actually quite difficult work, not work that's hard to understand if you try, but work that took a long time and required a lot of collaboration in order to make all of these consumer products that we think of as just working without any people behind them.
Yeah, and I think it turns out that there's a hunger for this. If you were to tell the stories this way or help people understand what's what's in the devices that they're using. It's not just a matter of historical interest. These are great stories, like human drama. Just think of the way that movie, and I'm spacing out on the name, the one that had Benedict Cumberbatch as Alan Turing, The Imitation Game. Yeah, so Imitation Game was really good drama, and it was mostly true the way it was told. You could quibble about some parts that they change for dramatic purposes, but that and the theory of everything about Stephen Hawking and his struggle and his not just his struggle but his triumph. Same thing. Turing, maybe his story has a sad ending, but still he's done so much. So I think it makes it much easier for kids to relate. That is, if they can think about their own future, their own possibilities, if they see what other people have gone through. Or how about Hidden Figures this year? What the women mathematicians did at NASA. Fantastic.
Broke so many expectations. It was a movie about women, about black women, and about black women doing math, which nobody expected to do well. And because it's everything that Hollywood has resisted for so long, and it killed at the box office. And of course, the book sales have probably spiked because of the film. Every time a book gets turned into a movie, they redo the book cover with the actors on the cover, and then people recognize it, and it's on all the bestseller tables, and people pick it up. I think it's wonderful. It's just wonderful. It makes me so happy. It must feel really good for you as a mathematician when you see a film like that just killing it in the public consciousness.
That movie in particular makes me feel good because for once the mathematicians are not crazy.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Isn't that a problem with the John Nash? I mean, it was a beautiful movie, don't get me wrong. What was it called? A Beautiful Mind?
Yeah, Beautiful Mind. I mean, it happens it was a true story for him. And in reality, he was probably sicker than the movie showed him. Because when I was an undergrad at Princeton, he was there, and he used to stare at us undergraduates, and he really was in bad shape at that point, and much creepier than the movie showed, in fact.
Interesting. But there's that, I think it was a play called Proof that they then turned into a film. And then there's, of course, I'm sure there are many more that I'm not pointing to, but there's just that idea, and it happens in the sciences, too, of sort of the mad mathematician, the mad scientist with the crazy hair who doesn't have any social skills and forgets to put on his shoes. And needs his wife to feed him every day because he can't take care of himself. Also, always male, by the way, always male.
Well, these are all the refreshing things about Hidden Figures that as you say, it's different people than we're used to seeing. They have been hidden in history, but there have been women doing math for a long time, and computer science and engineering and science. And so, notice that they were friends to each other. That is, they supported each other. That's a big dimension of science, that it's a very social enterprise, even though some of us are loners, but some of us are not. And so I thought it was a great corrective against a lot of the mythology.
Absolutely. And it was a damn good movie.
Plus, it was great entertainment,
Yeah, and of course, it's always good when great entertainment inspires a whole generation of youngsters. And I think that we've seen when we followed up after the film was released, all over social media, photos of people going with their young daughters, little girls getting excited about Hidden Figures, looking up to those women on the screen who look like them. That's so important to be able to see in popular media, people who look like us doing the things that we could potentially do. Otherwise, we'll never think we're sort of allowed to do it. We're sanctioned to do it.
One other movie that I feel has some of those same good messages, as well as being a true story, is the old movie Stand and Deliver. I don't know if you remember that one. That's the story of Jaime Escalante, who was an engineer who gave up his job in aerospace to become a high school teacher in East Los Angeles, where he taught kids who were written off as having no potential. And other teachers said, these kids really can't learn. And he said, no, students will rise to the level that the teacher expects. And he said, I'm going to teach them calculus so that they can all, get the best jobs out there. And people said, this is crazy. You can't teach, these kids can't do algebra. You're not going to teach them calculus. But he did teach them calculus. And they all started getting 5s on the advanced placement test, to the point that there was even a controversy. Some people at the advanced placement exams thought that there was some cheating going on. They just didn't think it was possible. But, so I take it you haven't seen this movie.
I'm reading about it right now.
It's a fantastic movie.
Almost.
Yeah, it's a great movie. Get it on whatever your favorite source of these old movies would be.
I'm doing that tonight. I'm absolutely doing that tonight. No, that's just wonderful. And it's so sad, too, to think that the expectations are so, dug in. You think East LA, you think these kids who were kind of forgotten by the system, and that if they suddenly start doing well, like you said, the AP board thinks, oh, they must be cheating. It's so sad that these preconceived notions, that these stereotypes, which sometimes are there for a reason, can be so overwhelming that they actually in turn can affect the outcomes, and you get this terrible negative feedback loop.
Now, I don't know if your guests are allowed to do this kind of thing, but let me tell you, a person who was one of Jaime Escalante's students, who is a female mathematician named Erica Camacho. She was also one of my students. That is, she went from East Los Angeles, then to Wellesley, and then to Cornell for graduate school, where she got her PhD in the program that I was the director of for a while, the Applied Math program. And she's now a professor at Arizona State University, where she is a very strong national leader in STEM, especially for women in math and Latina women in particular. I think you would get a kick out of talking to her if, of course, it's your show. But yeah, Erica Camacho is her name.
Oh, yeah, I'm definitely going to reach out. That's wonderful.
I think you'll like her. She'll talk your ear off.
Very, very cool. I love that. Yeah, it's interesting because I think that when we think about math, most people who, we've all been exposed to math in some form or another because everybody, maybe not everybody, but most people, especially in American society, and most of the countries that also listen to Talk Nerdy, which are the UK and Canada and Australia and other English-speaking countries. I do have listeners in other places. I have listeners all the way from Saudi to Japan, which is super cool. But the bulk of the listeners are in English-speaking countries. When we think about math, we think, okay, I've had some exposure because I went to school. Even if I only went to school for a little while, you start learning math when you're quite young. So you've had exposure to arithmetic and you've had exposure to algebra and maybe some calculus, maybe some statistics. But we don't really think of math as being a multifaceted field, and we often don't think of math as being a viable career path. We're like, math is math. It's like there's the basics and that's it. But obviously, there are whole departments dedicated to mathematics. Mathematicians have different focuses. When I look at your bio on your website, it says Stephen Strogatz is an applied mathematician who works in the areas of nonlinear dynamics and complex systems. Okay, what?
Maybe I better rewrite that sentence.
No, I love it. But it does make you stop and say, so there's applied math and there's I guess what would be the opposite, theoretical math?
Yeah, theoretical, or sometimes called pure or core.
Pure math.
Yeah.
And then there's, and then within those different fields, we're talking so many different types of mathematics, and these things aren't necessarily esoteric. These things, especially in the applied fields, are applied, meaning that they are connected to so many other things in our lives and so many other fields that we bump up against. So I would love to start, maybe we'll top down this a little bit. What is your field of mathematics? What is, first of all, the difference between applied and pure math? And then what is nonlinear dynamics and complex systems?
Okay, sure. Let's see. So pure and applied, I would say you could think about it in terms of looking inward or looking outward. If you're pure, you are a mathematician as poet. That is, you love your own subject and you're looking inward. You want to understand the structure of math itself with no reference to the outside world. It's about, if you define, we all grew up learning about addition and subtraction, and maybe at some point you learned these abstract things called commutative law, A plus B equals B plus A. It doesn't matter what order you add in. But you probably wondered all of us had to memorize commutative, associative, but why? What is that for? We know that 2 plus 3 is 3 plus 2. Why are we pointing that out? That's the kind of thing a pure mathematician would be interested in, because it starts to make you think about other systems where the order of operations or the order in which you do things doesn't matter. Like some things in life are not commutative. For instance, you can put your shoes on after you put on your socks. You cannot do it in the other order.
Yes.
Or at least not if you're a normal person.
Yeah, you could, but it would not be helpful.
So there are plenty of things that don't commute in the sense of that it makes a difference which order you do them. But curiously, addition does commute. Now, division does not commute. 2 divided by 3 is not the same as 3 divided by 2. So it starts to get interesting. And you're not talking about anything necessarily real. You're just exploring the property of being commutative or not. So I'm just giving maybe a kind of dry example of the sort of thing that a pure mathematician is interested in, just the properties of mathematical objects themselves, shapes, numbers, functions, all those kinds of things. Whereas an applied mathematician is an outward-looking sort of person who sees math in the world around him or herself, in engineering, in nature, in technology, in psychology, in economics. So everything really has a hidden layer of math in it, and it's the job of applied mathematicians to bring out that hidden structure, and then sometimes to use math in the service of those disciplines, and sometimes also to be inspired by those fields to discover new kinds of math. So for us, in applied math, it's a two-way street between the real world and the world of math inside our heads. Now, let's see, should I pause? Or you also asked me, what's my thing? I mean, that's like, what is nonlinear dynamics?
Yeah, that's like a whole other thing, isn't it? So yeah, before we dive into that, if you were to divide up, and maybe this is an impossible question to answer. Well, it couldn't be impossible, not for a mathematician, but maybe you don't have the data in front of you. If you were to divide up mathematics as an academic enterprise, as an academic field, would you say that the majority of mathematicians work in pure versus applied? Do the majority work in applied versus pure, or is it about like 50-50?
I don't actually know the answer to that. I mean, one way you could estimate, I suppose, would be to look at the American Mathematical Society. Well, I don't happen to have the numbers in front of me, but that's the organization for research pure mathematicians. So the American Math Society, how big is that compared to another society called Society of Industrial and Applied Mathematics, abbreviated SIAM, S-I-A-M. My instinct is that applied math is bigger because there are so many people who are applied mathematicians that don't live in math departments. There are people working at General Motors. There are people working at Pfizer, for big pharmaceutical companies. There are people working at hedge funds. There are like the women in Hidden Figures working at NASA. So there are applied mathematicians in every walk of life, including nowadays for Facebook and Yelp and Google and all the big data companies. Those people are applied mathematicians, although they might call themselves computer scientists. But because they're working with data, are they data scientists? Are they statisticians? It gets a little bit blurry.
It does. When I interviewed a bunch of string theorists for the show and for a live event, they said the same thing. They said, in a way, we are mathematicians. Like, what we do is mostly in the language of math because it's all theoretical, right? String theory is completely theoretical. It's just figuring out whether or not it works, but we don't have any direct data, any direct measurements of any of this. So even what we would consider physicists, theoretical physicists, depending on what they do, the vast majority of their work is mathematics.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to keep in mind that this is a recent historical phenomenon to divide the disciplines in this way. Nature is a whole. Nature is united. And nature doesn't respect the difference between a physicist and an engineer and a mathematician. Think about someone like Archimedes from 250 BC, who we know in all three areas, engineering for the law of the lever, which we use levers. I was just thinking about it as I was clipping my fingernails earlier today. Maybe you don't need to know that detail. My kids would say, Dad, TMI. But, every time if you clip your fingernails, you're using a lever, right? I mean, you push on the long end of the clipper, and then there's a little pivot point that puts a tremendous force through the clipping part onto the fingernail. That's how you clip it. So you're using a lever, even though you don't think of it as a lever. When you pull a nail out of a wall with a hammer,
it's true.
That's a lever action. And so Archimedes figured out the math of the lever, which you can also see in a playground when kids playing on seesaws, where the big kid has to sit closer to the fulcrum than the smaller kid so that they can balance. That's the law of the lever. So Archimedes has that, but he also invented the part of calculus that we call integral calculus. He came up with principle of center of gravity that race cars have to think about when they're designing them to be able to hold their traction when they're going around a tight turn. So you have someone like Archimedes, or we could do Galileo or anybody. All these people were simultaneously scientists and mathematicians and engineers. And it's a 20th century conceit. Well, maybe because of the age of specialization, that we're only one at a time. But to me, I'm a mathematician who's really interested in science, as well as the arts, honestly, and humanities. So I don't really like those distinctions.
I like that. When you say what aspects of science and what aspects of the arts are you especially interested in?
Well, I'm married to an artist, and as I have learned from my wife, I've just been finding out how much overlap there is between. I mean, she does painting, and actually, she doesn't really care what medium she's in. It could be painting, it could be sculpture, it could be charcoal, but she's interested in solving a problem. That is, she has some artistic thing in her head that she wants to express, and then she thinks about what medium will help her best express it. And that's what I feel like a lot of the time. Sometimes I'm interested in, say, a problem like 6 degrees of separation, where, if you and I started talking about this for a while, it wouldn't take us long to find someone that we both know in common. Besides Neil deGrasse Tyson, that'd be too easy. But, I mean, even if we didn't go there, because everybody knows Neil. But anyway, the point being that 6 degrees, this interesting phenomenon, is fundamentally a math phenomenon about networks. How can you have a gigantic world of 7 billion people or 8 billion or whatever it is, and each of us only knows a tiny fraction of all the people on Earth, and yet you could take 2 people at random and get them talking for a while. They will find a connection between themselves. So
it's true.
There's something mysterious.
And it's similar to a study recently that we covered on my other podcast, on The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, about conspiracy theories, and basically how there's always a tipping point, and you can sort of use mathematics to disprove certain conspiracy theories, because the more people that would be in on it, you can calculate with good precision how quickly they would become public, how quickly somebody would blow the whistle.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because the more people involved, the more likely it is that there will be a leak.
Nice.
And so it's like, it was kind of good evidence to support the fact that, these vast conspiracy theories that some people believe in really couldn't be the case if there are like whole multiple governments involved, and, like aliens or JFK or things like that. These like big conspiracy theories. So it's pretty interesting.
I mean, to me, the overlap here with the arts and sciences is that there are things we want to do, something that we have this nagging desire to solve a problem or to express something, and an artist feels it and a scientist feels it, and we may use different media, different tools, but this impulse, I think, is felt by artists and scientists alike. And so, I don't know. Also, our methods, that some people are very tight and try to do everything very controlled, and other people like to make a mess and then see what they've got and then clean it up afterward, or maybe never clean it up. Yeah. And that's true of both scientists and artists. I mean, they're different people with different styles. So I can see tons of overlap, but to me, it's because we're all human beings trying to be creative, and the same would be true of engineers or whoever.
Absolutely. I'm to go back a little bit to your specific areas of research. Your bio mentions nonlinear dynamics and it mentions complex systems.
Yes.
I'm assuming those are 2 very different things.
They're very similar, actually. I would call them cousins. Yeah. So,
cousins.
They're cousins.
I like it.
I mean, nonlinear dynamics. Okay, it's not the best brand name, but let me put it this way. So in math, we make a big distinction between linear and nonlinear. And a lot of people, when they hear that, think they're imagining the word in a psychological sense. I don't know what's in your head, but a lot of people, when they hear linear, they imagine, that person's a linear thinker. Like they're very sequential. They like to do one thing after another.
Oh, interesting. I think of a line.
Okay, good. That's better. Because that is really what we mean. It comes from the concept of a line, and when you abstract the idea of a line into like what you learned in high school algebra with drawing the equation of a line relating y
what is
to
it?
x.
Y equals mx plus b.
Yeah, that one.
Yay!
Right. So if we had y equals mx with no b, just the b being 0, that'd be what we would call linear relationship between y and x, which is, you notice, just a proportionality. If you double x, you will double y, assuming that the m stays constant. Like y equals 6x. If I change x to if x was 1, then I get 6 times 1 is 6. If I made x 2, then I get 6 times 2 is 12. So linear equations express proportional behavior. And why that's important is that a lot of things in life are linear. Like if you go to the store and you want to buy, juice packs for your kid, then if you buy twice as many juice packs, it's going to cost you twice as much.
Yep.
Unless there's some kind of a deal where they say if you buy 10 juice packs, then we'll give you the 11th one free or something like that. That would be nonlinear because now it's not strictly proportional. And so the linear things in the world are very easy to analyze because they can be broken down into parts with the technique that scientists call reductionism. That is, you can take a hard problem and analyze it by breaking it into smaller and simpler parts. Then you analyze those hopefully easier, simpler parts, and then you can add them back together and get the answer that you were looking for to the original big, hard, complicated problem. And so this works in many parts of physics that are governed by linear equations, like electricity and magnetism, which give us the wireless that we use in our computers or, through electromagnetic waves, or the radiation we use in our microwave ovens. All that is governed by linear equations. And so linear math and linear physics was the first to be solved historically because reductionism works beautifully and perfectly on it. But the big frontier of science in the 21st century and in the last half of the 20th century is everything nonlinear, which, let me put it in very plain terms. Suppose you're eating peanut butter and jelly together, that is better, most people would say, than peanut butter and jelly separately. Right?
Yes.
Or is it like the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup advertises that peanut butter and chocolate together is better than,
So there's like a gestalt to it. The sum is greater, or the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Bingo.
Gotcha.
So what we say in plain talk, that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. In math, we say that system is nonlinear.
Okay.
So anytime you have cooperation or interference, where the whole could be less than the sum of the parts, anything like that is nonlinear. And why that's a big deal to a mathematician is because all the techniques we have for analyzing things go out the window. We know how to analyze linear things. When there's synergies or cooperation or interference, our math breaks down. And now we're in the realm of nonlinear math, which is being created as we speak. That's the point.
Yeah.
Nonlinear dynamics is the math of the economy, of biology, of psychology, all the things that we think of as the soft sciences that are actually the hard sciences, that is all the things that are the greatest unknowns. What's difficult about them is that they're nonlinear. To understand how a mob is going to behave, it's not the sum of the individual people. They interact with each other. Or, you drink and take drugs. That's not just the superposition of what you would get if you took drugs and drank separately. They have interaction effects.
Yeah, and to somebody who does not do this for a living, obviously nonlinear, dynamics or nonlinear mathematics sounds way more interesting than linear mathematics.
It is. It's very hard. It's very hard, but very creative and very modern. And so that's what, in one form or another, almost every unsolved problem at the frontier of science is some kind of nonlinear problem. Actually, that's part of when you mention string theory. One key aspect of string theory is general relativity. And what makes general relativity so hard, among other things, is that the matter that exerts gravity warps space, but then the space acts back on the matter to affect how it moves. Or, so you have these constant interactions between matter and space-time, and not general relativity is a nonlinear theory that can have a lot of weird phenomena like black holes and gravitational waves and stuff like that.
It's fascinating. And so, but when you look at nonlinear dynamics, do you pick specific areas that are interesting to you? Like, do you dive into these theoretical physics areas? Are you more interested in the economy? Are you interested in psychology? Or do you just kind of look at it as it applies to many different things?
Yeah, I'm all over the place. I always liked all the different subjects in school, and truthfully, what happens is I get a student who needs to get a PhD, and then I find out what that student is curious about. So, like right now, my youngest student, who's just in the second year of her PhD program, is a young woman who is really interested in epidemics, but specifically what happens when you take into account that people don't just stand around waiting to get infected by a contagion. They are fearful, and they will take behavioral action to either cover their nose or to wash their hands or to move to a new place. That is, how does fear interact with epidemiology? So now you're fusing psychology with traditional epidemiology. And that's an interesting question and hasn't been studied very much. So that brings in nonlinear phenomena. That is, what we're interested in is writing predictive models of the behavior of populations of different people who are infected, people who are still susceptible to the disease, people who may have already gotten the disease and recovered. So we're trying to keep track of all of those different things. We have to think about how the different people are connected, who's likely to sneeze on whom or have sex with whom or whatever. And so, it's a big complicated problem, but there's a lot of data about it, and it's obviously very important. So this is the kind of thing, I've never really worked on this before, but I like a new challenge. And often my students lead the way.
That's very cool. That's very, what an exciting thing for a young researcher who is interested in pursuing a question that's been gnawing at them in their own heads. Because so many times, especially in more applied sciences, my field, biology and neuroscience, it's quite common that you choose your lab based on its proximity to something you might be interested in. But ultimately, you're usually working on a leg of your professor's research.
Yes.
They have the tools available to do a certain kind of a thing. So you're going to look at an aspect of that certain kind of a thing. But
Sure.
How amazing to be able to be in a lab. I don't know. Do you call it a lab when it's math?
I don't. No,
Okay.
It's not a lab. And that's part of why I can do this and a neuroscience professor cannot really do it as easily because they have big funding commitments to keep their lab going. They have to get a lot of grants to keep it going. And they're then promising the government or whoever it is that's funding them that they're going to study a particular topic. And if they're funded by the Defense Department, as some researchers are, either through the Army or Navy, they have what are called deliverables. They're supposed to deliver a certain set of information by the end of the study. So they don't have the freedom to do what I can do as a mathematician because it doesn't cost anything to support me. I just give me a computer and a bunch of pencils and paper and we can start doing math. So
I love that. Is that why most or is it not true that most mathematicians also have large teaching obligations?
Yes,
because in
it
the
is
sciences,
true.
It is. Okay. I love teaching. I think teaching was my favorite part of being, I worked as an adjunct for a little while I was working on my PhD. And I think that my unfinished PhD, by the way, that teaching was my favorite part. I liked it more than being in the lab. But I do notice that a lot of scientists, peers of mine, friends of mine, like either didn't teach or like they would get grant funded and they'd be like, whoa, I don't have to teach this semester. Like it was a good thing that they didn't have that obligation anymore. And I think in the sciences, a lot of people shy away from teaching. It's an obligation that they simply do if they need the money.
Well, you can even hear that in the way we refer to it. People talk about a teaching load. They'll say, what's your teaching load?
It's true.
Like it's a burden. And for me, I went into this because I love the idea of learning and explaining and teaching and being taught by my students. That's just, that's what I like doing. And for me, research is part of that because we're constantly learning and teaching each other as we make discoveries or get stuck. So yeah, it's all integrated in my head, including the public communication part of it, because that feels like teaching too. And
absolutely, it's just teaching to a broader audience that maybe has less of a background.
Yeah. So it's a special treat to be able to have this research style where the students can choose the direction, or at least suggest directions. That is, because of this freedom that I have as a mathematician, we're a little more freewheeling, a little, I don't know, daring is probably not quite the right word, but we can take adventures together. And I do enjoy that. But it's even within math, it's kind of rare. Normally it is what you said, that the professor is an expert, the professor is interested in X, Y, Z, and then has the student work on X prime, Y prime, Z prime, meaning things that are kind of close to X, Y, and Z, but maybe a little bit off to the side. I just sort of sometimes go off into something completely new with the feeling that, to me, it's a little bit like if you're a good swimmer, you could take someone else who's a beginner out into the deep water, and I'm not going to let my student drown, but they might take some water and, there might be some gurgling and a little bit of thrashing. But you will definitely learn. And the other thing is, it's not fake. This is the real deal. This is what research is. It's you against the world. And it doesn't always cooperate. It's, you can get unlucky, and you have to know how to save yourself when you're starting to drown. So, I'm being a little dramatic here, but I do think that these are the survival skills that if someone wants to be a remarkable researcher, they have to go after remarkable problems, and it may take some nerve, but it's fun, and usually it works out. And also, if it doesn't work out, you can always stop doing that problem and pick a different problem.
Yeah, that's true. It's not as hard because those problems are pen and paper and maybe some, advanced sort of computer programs that you might have to use and databases that you might have to have access to, but you haven't built up all of this technology around it, and you're not, obligated to the problem necessarily because it's not paying for your lab, which is a cool position to be in. It must be so exciting for your young students coming in.
Yeah, it's very nice. It's the way science used to be, not just in math, but all of science. But in the era of big science requiring the big funding, I think people's hands are tied, and so I understand why they feel, as you say, obligated to pursue something that's likely to pay off, and that's okay. A lot of great work has come out of that approach, and I should say my approach runs the risk of being a dilettante, where we don't really know what we're doing. So usually we like to collaborate with someone who does know what they're doing. That is, like for instance, right now, a different student that I work with is interested in cancer, of course, very important problem. But from the point of view of network theory, which is an area that we've worked in, my students and I over the years have worked on network problems, where here the vision is that you have cells that are normal in a tissue, and then there are also cells that are abnormal, either precancerous or cancerous, genetically mutated cells, which tend to reproduce faster than the normal cells and will push them out of the tissue layer and start to take over. Or if it's in the bloodstream, like in leukemia, then, they might start to mess up the bone marrow, whatever. But so think about the bone marrow as a geometrical structure. This is where the math comes in, that the bone marrow is sort of a three-dimensional lattice. It's like a jungle gym, in the playground. So these cells, as they're reproducing and getting pushed out by the cancer cells, it's a question of sort of black dots replacing the white dots, abstractly, the black dots being the bad guys and the white dots being the good guys. And there's different patterns of invasion, and you can ask questions about how long does it take for the black dots to take over the whole network, and how does that depend on how the network is connected, et cetera, et cetera. My point being that we're working on this with a radiation oncologist who really knows about this and who treats patients with leukemia. So it keeps us on the straight and narrow from just, flying off into something where we don't know what we're talking about.
And it also allows it that if you do make any great discoveries or any breakthroughs and you do see a pattern that maybe nobody's recognized previously, that you can give that applied knowledge back to the field where it would be most useful. And it may actually, lend its voice to potential treatments or strategies in the future, which is amazing.
Well, that's exactly what applied mathematicians dream of doing. That's, like I say, we're outward looking. So for us, it's math in the service of everything else. And if it happens to be epidemiology or cancer or physics or whatever, that's what makes at least my kind of applied mathematician happy. That's what we're trying to do, because math is so incredibly powerful. And there is this mystery that the universe is structured along mathematical lines when you look at it deeply enough. That we have the secret, and we want to share the secret with all these other practitioners.
Yeah, a lot of times we talk about math as a language that's fundamental to all other aspects of nature, all other aspects of the universe, of science, right? That it's the fundamental building blocks on which biology and physics and chemistry and computer science are built. Do you see math as a language?
It is. It is a language, but I have to say that analogy always makes me cringe a little bit.
Good. Please tell me why, because I use it all the time, and I don't want to use it incorrectly.
No, it's a very common thing to say, and there is truth to it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that it doesn't go far enough.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Math is a language, but it's much more than a language, and it's because we don't have a word for what it is. There is nothing like math in this respect. So to try to illustrate what I mean, let's suppose, okay, I don't know, why don't we go back to talking about hidden figures for a second? So
sure.
The characters in Hidden Figures, if you remember, are trying to calculate trajectories for John Glenn and Alan Shepard and the other astronauts who are going to be going into outer space. And they're doing rocket trajectory design. To get, like in the case of John Glenn, they want to make sure he can get back into the atmosphere without burning up, and that he will land at the right place so that the Navy can pick him up in the middle of the ocean, and he's not out there bobbing around and potentially drowning. Okay, so the trajectory design problem requires math for its description, in the sense that you just said, that it's a language to describe a trajectory of a rocket that's a curve, and you need math equations to describe the shape of that curve and how the rocket will move in response to the forces that are produced by the burning of the rocket and so on. So it is a language, but it's a language with an incredibly powerful machine built inside of it, a logical machine that lets you take the language, express the statements of Newton's laws of motion and gravity. You can express those statements in that language, but then you can apply the logical engine of math to make predictions about where the rocket is going to be. You see what I'm saying? It's not just a language. It's a language that lets you predict the future. And normally a language doesn't do that.
Absolutely not. And it's also a universal language, too, in that we think of language as being obviously culturally bound, but math is everywhere and everything and underlies everything.
Yeah, it's sort of, maybe you could think of, I don't know, it's hard to find a good analogy. It's more like math is the operating system of the universe.
Oh, I love that analogy. Oh, that's so good.
It's much more than a language, because to talk about an operating system, you need computer language, but you know that an operating system makes the machine run.
Yes.
That's the point. Math is the operating system. It's much more than a language, but it is a language.
Oh, yeah. I think the reason we often talk about it as a language is just to get over that initial hump of people not understanding that until you have your kind of fundamentals, until you get your basics, so many things are going to be Greek to you. Mm-hmm. And that's such a bummer when it comes to theoretical physics, is that as a science communicator who has focused my whole life on neurobiology, when I interview physicists, I can talk about things using analogy. I can talk about things in kind of a top-line overview way. But there are basics that I just don't understand the way that physicists do, because I don't speak math the way that they do.
Yeah, it's the speaking and the Well, yeah, let's see. If we explore the idea of the speaking, it's interesting. I'm not sure where I would go with this. But so when you're immersed in a culture and you start, say, learning to speak Spanish, yes, you could learn what the words mean, but there's much more to learn than what the words mean, right? There's the literature, there's the food, there's the dance, there's how people treat their families. All
And
that is part of Spanish too, right?
Yeah, and there's the idioms, there's the terms of phrase that don't actually translate correctly, but they mean something new and different because they're so culturally bound. There's so many nuances once you become fluent versus, being a newbie to a language.
Yeah.
That it's very hard to understand until you're really immersed in it.
And that is the part of math that is off-putting to so many students. Unfortunately, really, it's a culture like everything. And so if you're not immersed in this culture long enough, even if you learn the words, you still don't really know what's going on in math or in anything else. And so it does take a lot of effort and commitment. And actually, it's nice if it would be if we could make it a more welcoming environment so that people would want to stay for a while to pick up the idioms. That would help.
I think some of that might come down, and I mean, I could be totally wrong, but I am a perfect example of your traditional American girl who started thinking that she was only talented and capable in sort of the linguistic aspects of academia. When I was young, I was in all the competitive things, and I did, the science fairs and the math Olympiads and things because I was in the gifted and talented programs as a child. But as I grew and grew and grew, I realized, I love poetry and I love literature, and I would say I'm not very good at math and I'm not very good at science. And because I was afraid I wasn't good at it, of course, having that fixed mindset, I just completely shied away from it. And then having to reapproach it in college, it was like, I'm a psychology major, so I'm going to study exactly what I need and no more. I'm not going to study calculus at all. I'm only going to study probability and statistics because that makes more sense in psychology. And I really went through those motions like a lot of young women and girls do. And I found science much later in life and fell in love with it. But by then, I think that I had been so afraid of math and physics that I had a burden against them that's always been a little bit hard to look past. Like, I am that person who's like, ooh, math. Ooh,
It's interesting. I mean, the way you describe it is so this is a thing that many people feel, and I want to focus on the word afraid. Didn't you say that?
I did.
Yeah, I think you did. That I feel like is a key for us understanding what we're doing wrong. We math educators, that math doesn't. I mean, it'd be one thing if people said, "I don't find math interesting," or "It's not my cup of tea," or whatever. But what happens is it can be much worse than that for people. People can become traumatized by it or feel that they're stupid. And they get feeling afraid of it because it's so aversive to feel like that. Nobody wants to feel stupid or humiliated. So is that true of other subjects? Like if someone says, I never really liked geography in school, I don't know anybody who says I'm afraid of geography or I'm not a geography person.
It may be for certain people, depending on where they think that their, difficulties lie. I had that strangely all through high school. I had that with history, which makes no sense because I love history and I'm a ferocious reader now, but like, I said ferocious. I meant ferocious and voracious at the same time.
It's great.
I made it my
it's
own
a great
word.
new word.
But it's because I always knew this about myself. I have a bad memory for like discrete numerical information. And so it's like, I'm not good at dates. And so history scared me because so much of the testing in history class was just, when did this happen? And it was so frustrating because it's like, I love the brilliant stories, but I hate the discrete testing of the individual dates.
So here's what I'm afraid of. It's funny what people are afraid of. So I remember being afraid in French class when there would be this game that the teacher would make us play where it wasn't really a game, but each kid would have to conjugate a verb, and then it would go around the room, the next kid, and then the next kid, like a train moving around the room. And I could feel the train coming toward me, and you didn't know what word you had to conjugate. And I just remember being afraid that when it gets to me, I'm not going to be fast enough. Because for me, the problem is speed. I'm kind of slow. I really am. I mean, my wife loves to tease me and my kids about how slow I am. I take a long time to do things that other people would do faster, like, even just washing the dishes. Like, Dad, what's taking so long? but I'm just kind of pokey and slow, and usually it's because I'm dreamy and thinking about something. But so anything where speed is important, or spontaneous reactions that don't require that actually are hurt by thinking. For instance, dance. If you're dancing, you're supposed to just feel it and do the, like you're supposed to know what to do. And I'm always afraid in any situation where I have to dance according to dance steps. I think, oh God, I'm going to really embarrass myself.
That's hilarious. Yeah. It's true, because some people are more comfortable just diving into that kind of cerebellar function. But also they've probably practiced a lot, and so it has become second nature to them. Right. But that's interesting. It's funny. It's true. There's such a personal relationship that we have with being on the spot. So much of our core education, the education that happens during our developmental years, has less to do with the content and the topics and more to do with our psychology, our relationship to other students, our relationship to ourselves. It's like we're expected, for good reason, to learn a lot of this fundamental knowledge during a time when we're more capable in a neurological sense because we're more sponge-like, right? But we're almost less capable in a developmental sense to really be responsible with this core responsibility. Wow. It's like we always talk about how much we would love to be students again with all the wisdom we have as adults.
No, that's a really interesting point. That you're right. Because there's this developmental thing of identity formation, or whatever you would call it, where you start to feel like you know who you are, or you're discovering who you are, and that's happening at the same time as like you say, you're probably at your peak at being able to learn new things. And yet,
yeah, you're inundated in school. Like, we don't learn nearly at the level as adults. I mean, sure, some of us choose to read a lot of books or read the paper every day, or, we have what we have to do in school, or at work. But usually it's narrow. We're learning things in a very narrow field the older that we get.
Well, I think a lot of it is fear. When I think about, say, funny about French, that I had a grad student who was originally from Cameroon, and she loved to speak to me in French. And I always understood what she was saying. My French is good enough that plus she's probably speaking to me at a 5-year-old level.
She's helping you out a little.
So I could understand her, but then she would say, because she liked to tease me, she'd say, Steve, just talk back. I know you understand me. Just speak French to me. And I wouldn't, because, like, I'm the professor. I'm supposed to know what I'm doing. And there's no good excuse. I really should just, so what if I make a mistake? Who cares? But it's still, I'm afraid.
Of course, yeah. Fear dictates so much. It dictates so much in culture, and it dictates so much in our relationship to things, even as basic as and beautiful as mathematics. Well, Steve, this has been such a great talk, and there's so many more things I wish we could get into, but I've taken up so much of your time. Before we go, I was hoping that I could ask you the same 2 questions that I ask all of my guests on the show.
Okay. I can't stop you.
Yeah, I'm sure I could ask. You don't have to answer. All right. So they are kind of big picture questions, but they don't have to be. So I want you to think about whatever context is important to you. So we could be talking about your own personal life, your family, your friends, your academic endeavors, but we could also be talking about bigger picture stuff, community, the globe, the universe, and beyond. So here are the 2 questions in whatever context you'd like to answer them. The first is, when you think about the future, what is the thing that is most worrisome to you? What keeps you up the most at night? What bums you out and concerns you? But on the flip side of that, so we at least end on a positive note, what are you most excited and hopeful for?
Whoa.
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
I'm evil.
These are really hard ones. And so I think the thing that worries me the most, and I I'm scared about it, really scared, is what I see as a pernicious feedback loop in which our society in the U.S. and maybe even in the world is people are not talking to each other who disagree with each other, and they're also living apart from each other. That is, we're self-sorting in our communities, in the churches that we either do or don't go to. It feels like there's a breakdown of the social fabric, and people are not only not talking, but they're, through social media, this amplifier now, we're really yelling at each other, and also the anonymity that people have behind social media, where they can be, there's a kind of lack of accountability. People say vicious things to each other, and social psychology teaches us like what people will do, say in the Milgram experiment, how if you're shocking someone, or, the experiment I'm talking about, the obedience to authority experiment, that people will, if the person that you think you're shocking is sitting right next to you screaming, you're much less likely to give them a lethal shock than if they're in another room and you can't see them and you can't hear their screams. Under conditions like that, you can just sort of abstract them away in your mind, and people will do much worse things. So I feel like as we're getting more and more separated, it does feel like things are falling apart, and I don't see how we're going to get out of this. Is it going to be a social revolution? Is it going to be an economic meltdown? Is there going to be a coup? But then, okay, if I want to be happier about it, I think, well, there's always young people. Maybe the old people will just get older and older and die off, and the young people will realize what they need to do to straighten things out. So I guess there's always cause for optimism in youth. And I don't know. This is now not a scientific discussion as much as a political one, but that is actually what I'm scared about. And what am I hopeful about? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. It's just, real quick to interrupt before we move on to what you're hopeful about. It's an interesting answer, and I think an important answer, and an answer that really speaks to, I think, who you are and what you do as a mathematician, because a lot of people on the show, and not to belittle it because it's so important, they'll talk about climate change, and they'll talk about these big existential kind of eschatological issues that we're facing. But this really gets to, I think, in a way, the root.
Yeah, I do. I think so.
Behind a lot of
That's
the things
right.
like climate change, because we're not communicating, and because we have such horrible in-group, out-group statuses, these walls that are really hard for us to pull down. And we're living in a political climate now where they are emboldened, which is especially scary.
Well, and it's ironic because you would think, I didn't see this coming. I thought that with Facebook or Twitter, that we would be able to communicate better with each other. And it's turned out not to be true. It's turning out, at least it looks like to me, that we're now getting our news from different sources. We're self-segregating into these little, everyone talks about whatever echo chambers. There is some truth to that. And that's an extremely disturbing development that, only a few days ago I heard the phrase for the first time, weaponized social media. That our social media, which is, of course, big network infrastructure that's been developed, you thought to find people in the Facebook of the college or high school you went to more easily. It sounds so benign. That's what the Facebook was when I was a college freshman. We used to look at the Facebook to see all the freshman girls that we didn't know. Who are they? That's what Facebook meant. Yeah. And now it's a way to for bots from countries that would like to do us harm to send out really vile lies and God. True. So it's very peculiar and very, very disturbing. And so, yes, I do think that the communication and societal, I don't think breakdown is too strong a word. I really do think that's where we're heading, is that's being enabled by something that was supposed to bring us together. Very weird.
Yeah, I agree. Is there anything you're hopeful for?
Well, there have been hard times before. This may be too myopic a perspective. If I think about my parents who lived through World War II, and they were not in the war. My dad was in the war, but how scary it must have been for them at a time with Hitler and Mussolini and Stalin and, living through the Cold War. So there have been hard times before, of course. And for many people in the world, it's incredibly, unspeakably hard, terrible times. And yet, overall, strangely, things do seem to get better. If you believe Steven Pinker's analysis, let's say, about violence in the world has been going down. It doesn't seem right, but, part of it is our awareness of violence. That has been going up. But overall, people are not being tortured as much as they used to be. Wars are less frequent than they used to be. It sounds counterintuitive, but data shows that it's true, that things are getting better. So
yeah,
I
it's
guess,
true. We don't always know it because of the coverage, but when you actually look at the data.
Yeah, you could do an experiment. Suppose you didn't pay attention to the news. If you just didn't check your devices and you didn't watch TV, how bad would your life really be? How bad would you think things are? And I think if I ask the question that way, things seem about the way they've always been. Of course, we're very fortunate here to live in the U.S. Compared to some other places we could be. On the other hand, we did take a sabbatical. My family and I, professors get to take sabbaticals and, have a year off or a half a year off every 6 or 7 years. And we lived in Denmark, and we saw a very different way of living. Where, well, we're going to really get into politics if I start going on with that. But anyway, I guess I'm hopeful that there have always been tough times, and somehow we do seem to blunder through it, but I don't quite see how we're going to get out of this one.
I think we will. I think it's about patience and knowing that, even though we're going to take a few steps back, we just have to rebuild.
I hope you're right. Yeah.
We've done it before. I'm also, hoping that this administration is as short as it can possibly be and gets into the rearview mirror as fast as possible. I guess and it may be some cognitive dissonance in my mind, just kind of holding on to the hope that this will be a minimal blip. I think it's just the only way that I can soldier on, because if I allow myself to fall into despair, then I will be less effective as a science communicator. Mm-hmm. So maybe I am convincing myself of something that's not true, but I want to maintain positive in light of, it's a very difficult time. It could be a dark time, but I think in the darkest time is when we need the light the most. So that's what we do.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the work that you're doing.
No, and thank you so much. And oh my gosh, I'm so happy that we got to have this chat. I highly recommend that everybody check out your books if they want to learn more about math and really start to establish a new relationship with math, maybe as adults. You've written so many. The Joy of X really made a mark, I think, in society. Is it safe to say that this has been your most successful book?
Yes, I would say so. And if people wanted to sample it, the New York Times published a number of the chapters. That's where they originally appeared, some of them, in a series that was called The Elements of Math. So if you just search for Strogatz and Elements of Math, it'll come up, and you can get your 10 free views of the New York Times in a month. Check out one or two and see if you like them.
Or you could subscribe like I do, and you could read it anytime you want.
There you go.
Or you can pick up the book, and you can read it in its entirety. It's such a wonderful book. And Steve, again, thank you so much for joining me, but let everybody know, are you active in social media at all? Where can they kind of see your work? I know that you're constantly publishing and you do great, public events, and your website is full of wonderful, video content at stevenstrogatz.com. But are you also active on social media?
Yes, I'm on Twitter more than I should be. Yeah, and so that's. I think if you search for Strogatz on Twitter, I'm one of the few with that name. So I should pop right up. But yeah, Steven Strogatz is the handle.
Well, everyone stop by and say hi and tell Steve how much you enjoyed the show. So again, for the 50th time, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Cara. My pleasure.
Of course. And everyone listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.